Welcome, everyone. And today we're going to be continuing on our concept explanation. So, yesterday we dealt with joins and primary versus uh, foreign keys. And today we're going to be continuing on that day six, concept one, which is going to be dimension versus fact tables. Okay. And guys, I really want you guys to get this really, really clear. All right. So now let's dive into it. Okay. Let's dive into what we have for today. Now, what do we mean by fact tables? Okay, what do we really mean by the fact tables or the dimension tables? Okay, so first of all, when we're talking about fact versus dimension table, we are focusing on the data itself. Now, fact table, what it does stores quantitative data, measurable data about business processes or transactions. Okay, and examples include sales amount, quantity sold, and so on. Now, what's the nature of this data? It is usually transactional, and does also contain foreign keys, right. And so, for example, one row per order, it does contain things like that. And then we're going to dive into some example in the later on of this particular session. Now, in terms of the size, you see it's usually very large, and I'm going to explain that. And you see it does contains transaction data like I mentioned, and the reason why it's large is because it undergoes frequent update. Now, what do we mean by this quantitative data, right? So say for example, and we're going to dive into that later on, you can have a store. In this fictitious, we say bicycle store, right? A bicycle store, right? And so you could go purchase, make an order, and then within that order you can have product A, right? And also you can have product P, right? And so we need to keep storage of this information, right? So, and you can imagine if we have, let's say, 1,000 customers in a day that place multiple orders, you can imagine how big this data can really be, and that's why it's really large in nature. For example, the table you are looking at is at this level. Okay, it's record or stores data of the orders placed, and then at the product level. So in other words, an order can contain multiple products, and we want to make sure we account for that. So those are the type of information you should look for when you think of fact table. All right, so let's go quickly into the dimension table. Okay, let's go quickly into the dimension table. And all right, so we have the dimension tables, and then what is dimension table in this case? It does provide descriptive attribute, not that, right? And I'm going to explain in a minute. And examples include product information, customer information, and the nature, it does represent entities and usually textual or categorical data. All right, and example include one row per product or per customer. All right, and as you can see here, we've seen this in the last session where one product can represent one headset. Okay, uh, basically four represent headset ball bearing, and this can then have other attributes like product number, color, and so on. And you can imagine, because of the nature of the dimension table, they are usually not frequently updated, right? And so they are smaller than a fact table. Okay, for example, also if you take a look at customer, they are not frequently updated compared to transactions where you can have thousands of transactions in a single day. All right, and so those are ways that you can use to quickly identify what we mean by dimension tables. All right, So let's quickly go to some real examples here. Let's assume that we have this receipt, right? Focus on this receipt. And within this receipt, I want you guys, based on the information I just provided to you, try to identify information that we can categorize as dimension data or fact data, right? Pause the video, do the exercise yourself, and then come back to the video. Now, I assume you've done that, so let's continue here. So first of all, if you look at here, usually this says any bike store, right? So this would contain store information. Say for example, the bicycle company we have been talking about, let's assume that we have two stores, right? This store information is going to appear on every receipt. However, these two stores, their information are constant for the large for the most part, right? They are going to be changed. I thought they're going to change, very infrequent, right? So we can categorize on that dimension data. Let's look at some couple. You can see this employee is part. The employee information also doesn't change frequently as a transaction, so we can also categorize that under the dimension info, right? And also we have the customer information, the same as well. I mean, we could have customer that stay at the same location, the same name, date of birth. Some of those things don't ch- don't change, okay? And then let's keep looking. And then when you look at the product here as well, you can see that those information don't typically change. However, in our fact table, you want to reference like the product ID that we've looked at before, so that we can be able to pull up this information from the fact table, okay? But the key information that actually constitutes the fact table itself, they are the quantifiable information. For example, the sale of this product, you can see the subtotal here, subtotal right here, the GST here, another GST here, and the total tax, and then you also then have the total, right? And then you have the credit card, the amount that was charged on the credit card. And so these are the information that we want to keep in the fact table. Obviously, we're also going to have the foreign keys as well that we can then use to reference some of these dimension information. Now, to put things in context, right? Now, as I wrap up on this particular session, so let's assume we don't have dimension information, right? And then we only have the fact information. And let's say we are dealing with total sales, and say in a particular day we have $1 million sales, right? Now, this is good information to know we have $1 million sales in a day. However, it doesn't tell us much, right? If we want to discuss, okay, what product should we invest in, what product should we market more, we can't answer the information just with this intelligence that we have. However, that's when the dimension information come handy. When we had a dimension, say for example at the product level, this information, let's say we have three products, okay, or two products. A, let's say, is about 900k, and then product B, right, is 100k, right off the back. We can tell that people are more interested in product A compared to product B. Then that gives us something to talk about. We can say, okay, as a company, do we want to just have more adverts on product B, or do we just want some more variation of product A? That way people have more alternatives and options to choose from. See, then we begin to get some more intelligence from this information. You can see why dimension information comes in. It provides some level of description of our fact table. I hope this really brings some clarity to this concept. I hope you learn a thing or two, and if this is helpful, don't forget to share with others. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next session.